There's a lot to be said about a good, solid hardwood workbench. Softwood absorbs your mallet blows, so for handwork, it's not that great, to be quite honest with you. You want, a dead stop when you're chiseling. But the problem is with a hardwood workbench, we are talking thousands of pounds of money to make one. And in this instance, my brother had, strange enough, 3 hardwood dining tables laying about, beech and oak and some other bits laying about. There was just enough wood to make this bench and not cost a fortune and give him an epic workbench. But make no mistake about it, even with, having the materials there, it might have been cheaper actually to buy the wood pre-planed up and then glued up, because if you put together the hours I've had to plane that together and the fixing up of everything I've had to do to make that look like a respectable bench for whatever reason, and the glue, I use 5 litres of glue at the very least, just in laminating that top. Then there's the Festool connector bits later on that you will see that they're not cheap. But what you've got to understand is this is no normal workbench. Most hand tool workbenches would be about 600mm wide, so you can reach across, get in there, and there's no stretching involved. This is going to be about 2 meters long by 1 meter wide. That's massive for a woodworking workbench. It's fucking huge. So you can imagine the weight of a solid wood top that's 2 meters long, 80mm thick, and 1 meter wide. That's too heavy for most people to manage, isn't it? So I needed to come up with a way of keeping it together and it be able to come apart if it needs to be moved to another house or whatever. Again, I had the same problem with the base, because the amount of base that's needed to support that substantial amount of weight needed to be quite big, and it isn't just going to fit round your normal door frame on most houses. So basically this whole workbench, being a monster, needed to be an IKEA style bench. I needed to be able to break it down so it could be transported if needed be, if my brother moves or whatever. And this is what I mean about the extra work that's involved. It's not just planing wood to make it square, it's having to fix it, make it look good again. And this is the show face, so it needs to look pretty. It needs to be able to take a beating too. When it comes to something like this, you really need all the support you can get. Best mates, your mother, everything. That's quite a hefty lump to be moving through the planer. You guys might call it a jointer. But to get that nicely, accurately cut, you want your best friends involved in this one. The reason I'm doing it this way with the saw, instead of running the face up against the fence on the planer, to making sure you get a nice jointed edge, so it's because it's just too much weight to control. That saw cuts 80mm depth on the track, so I just need to plane off that little notch, as it were, I suppose, and then send it through the planer, and then flip it over and send it through the planer again. So I've got nice, clean, perfect glue joints, even though I don't need glue joints, but I do need all of this to sit nice and beautifully together at the end. Same with the end grain, cross cut with that track saw, and finish it off with a block plane. Won't lie to you, that was a lot of work to get it like that. I grew an inch just looking at that. Looks beautiful. Now, I'm a big fan of covering the metal vices with wood and extending the jaw capacity slightly. I don't think there's really any point of you doing this unless you've got the rear jaw of the vice sunk behind the top, so you can't see it. So the face of the vice is clamping against the very, very long board that's running the full length of your vice. So when you're hand planing a long board, effectively what happens is that board is clamped against the rear board. Now, if you've got a vice you've just mounted and it's got 2 jaws and the rear of that jaw is not sitting flush, the board is going to fishtail around you and it's not supported. It's going to be an absolute fucking nightmare to plane it flat and nice. So basically I'm making a template. I'm using a router and a guide bush. I'm not a big fan of router bits with bearings on them. They're prone to failure, they're prone to burning. When the bearing falls off because it's not tightened on properly, it ain't fun. with a bushing and a router cutter, and you've done your little bit of maths. It's not a great deal of maths either. Have a look at my previous video talking about them. It's a much safer way of working too. I don't subscribe to these people that say, well, you know, it's very difficult to make a jig perfect. Well, I won't take that router to that workpiece until that jig is perfect. 3 years ago I would have said it's only a bit of ply, so it's nothing. Costs cool, but these days, you know, it's a bit different. But now, the age-old question I probably imagine you're wondering is, why wouldn't you use a softwood instead of a hardwood? I've tried softwood in the past, and it distends too easily, and then you end up with a sort of surface of the moon vase, and it's not very good. Hardwood with a bit of leather, or in this case I've used something else, which you'll find out later. Doesn't fail me, hasn't failed me. And if you're doing some chisel work, the last thing you want is your vice to be not gripping that piece of wood when you've got a chisel in your hand. I have been there, and it ain't fun. For furniture, Osmo recommends sanding to 220 grit. This is a workbench. It's going to take a beating. Osmo recommends sanding floors to 180, which I imagine withstands high heels and that kind of beating. So this whole bench is only sanded to 180, finished with Osmo. Poly-X. My preferred method of finishing with Osmo is to lather it on, let that soak in, and then take off the excess. That way I can never see any lines from the rag or the brush or anything in the finished piece. I've got to be completely honest here, I actually left this out accidentally somehow. It didn't get copied over. I don't know if you guys have had a jig similar to this with a drill. I've got to say to you, you've got to put an inordinate amount of pressure down on it to get it to go in, and it burns too. I mean, I sharpened a bit. Oh no, I still felt like I've got to put a hell of a lot of downward force to get it to work. Threaded inserts without an Allen key or screw thread to get them back out again. Here's the fix. Just shove a screwdriver right in there. Thanks to the People of Woodworking UK Facebook group for that tip. That was great. I spent hours trying to get those bloody things out. I better chime in here. I'm making a quick sled because I need to cut a scarf joint on some really wide stock, you know, the legs of the base, because I don't simply have enough wood that's long enough. So I need to make those bits of wood longer, what I do have of. You'll probably notice I'm only using one of the mitre slots for the runner for the sled. I can't be asked to mess around with two of them. They can bind against each other. It'll be a raw pain in the arse, no point. Watching someone smash out a mortise is pretty boring. All I'm doing here is smashing out the waste, getting close to where there's like 2-3 mil waste left. I'm not going to chisel all the way through to the other side. What's left of the 2-3 mil I'll halve and halve again and use a combination square to check the walls are plumb and square. This gives me a flat face to reference the back of the chisel off of. I'll step the cuts like an open mine. The waste on the bevel side of the chisel is your enemy. Remember that, because it pushes the chisel back to your line or past that line, which you don't want. To show you what I mean, there's about 2 mil of waste there to that line. Now I'm going to halve that, smash it out, sighting the chisel level, plumb, I suppose you'd call it. And I'll be honest with you, that's a bit risky taking 1 mil to your line. I'd rather halve that, but to be honest with you, I know this is plywood, it's soft as shit, and the chisel isn't going to be shoved back past that line. To exaggerate my point, if this was the same case, but it was in a piece of hardwood like a bit of oak, and I put that chisel in on that line and try to smash the mallet, watch that move backwards. So that's a good 1/2 mil way back past your line. So your mortise is going to be massive. When you're doing that, you want to sight the chisel. And if that chisel starts to move to the right and you see a dark gap appear, you know you're not chiseling straight downwards, you know, you're undercutting. When you're getting there and you're getting very close and you know you've got like a rizzle of paper to take off of that mortise walls, then get out your nice sharp chisel and pare it nice and flat. Keep checking with your combination square that your walls are nice square as you go down. Use your combination square as well to check the depth if you're not doing it through mortise, and then flip it over and finish that off. Really, that's it. When it comes to fitting, you're going to have to be like Inspector Gadget, Columbo, whatever. You've got to investigate where is it going wrong. It could be so many different things as well. You could have twist in it, could be cocked off to the left or right, all sorts of things. You've got to basically figure it out as you go, and then that isn't easy. You can use your tools like your combination square to work out what's square, and you can honestly smash your head against a brick wall thinking everything's square. Why isn't it working? You might have a belly somewhere in your mortise, for instance. You might have a belly in your tenon. You need to sort of do the maths and work it out, as it were. There's no straight answer someone can tell you that this is what's wrong, unless you're standing in front of what's being sawn and what's been chiselled out. Most of all, though, softly catch your monkey. These small increments, test fit, small increments, test fit. And if it gets bad, really make it bad and then fix that to make it better. I don't make no pretense about it, my chisel work sucks. That looks like a ripped out fireplace, but it's a tight fit. You're probably wondering what all that green tape's about. I label everything, so when it comes to a glue up, I know D goes with D, A goes with A, and so on. Saves a lot of swearing. am I doing this on the bandsaw? Those little thin strips of oak I can't really do on the planer, and they're well handy to keep in your drawer somewhere, because you never know when you're gonna. And those little shims can come in handy, so don't just smash them out, keep them. Call me a warlock, but sometimes you just get a bit lucky and you think, I'm glad I fucking did that. As you can see, coming out of here. And for the sides too. Before you go ahead and do anything like this, it's a good idea to do some test pieces first on the wood you're using. In this case, I've got 3 different dining tables, so I can't be 100% sure. Well, I can be 100% sure none of this wood came from the same tree, so it is going to react differently to the ammonia. I can smell from sawing it. One smells like French oak or European oak, whatever you want to call it. There's a comparison between the two. One's been fumed, one hasn't been, but they're of the same pieces of oak. It was actually the French oak in the end that gave me the most grief, because it had very little tannic acid in it, almost to the point like beech does, which is about 15%, I think, beech. So I had to come up with a plan, and that was to make my own tannic acid tea, which you see me doing here. I didn't film everything, and I can assure you, I think at the end I put a good half pot in that water, mixed that with warm water, and then just painted it on the wood, let it dry, and then put it all in a tent with the ammonia. Even though I spent, I think, 2 weeks doing test pieces, trying to get it all figured out, it still went horribly wrong, and I had to start again. My apologies here, I've realised I've got to backtrack because I didn't show you any of the joinery, or why I had to do this joinery over glued mortise and tenon. I can't get this frame round my brother's door frames into his workshop in his house. Not a chance. This bench is so big it's not going to go through any door frame, so I had to make sure it could be broken down, and given it's a bench that's going to take more of a hammering than the local rub and tug, I needed to find a way to secure it. I've used these before, and funny enough actually, a bed, and I was really impressed how strong they are. They're kind of like IKEA fixings, except probably 100 times more expensive and 100 times much stronger. They're really, really strong, and I've got no quarrels where this is going to work. Let's make 2 different types of these connectors. One type joins 2 panels together, and one type joins a rail stretcher to a leg. For those of you that want to know how these work, it's simple really. You screw that bolt in, and it will push out those kind of anchor looking feet thingies into the wood. And damn, are they difficult to get back out again without unscrewing that bolt. They're very strong. The reason I've cut these domino mortises and they look a bit odd is because of that fence on the domino. It can only go to a certain depth, and I want to try and get those tenons equally spaced around to give me maximum strength. It is funny watching back things you've done. Right there, I'm going to be using a screwdriver in that hole to tighten them up. Just seen that, but I just noticed I could have used a ratchet or a spanner, you know. Like an idiot. Rule of thumb though, when you ever do a tenon and mortise, the tenon should be 1/3 the thickness of the stock. So you can see why I've got 2 tenons and 2 of these pedestal connectors. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is how the stretchers, rails are going to connect to those legs. And as you can see there, those little Allen key grub screws They've got a slight point into them, as you might have saw earlier, that the bolt is slightly cut. So when you screw those in, it pulls the joint together too, nice and tight, like tight as a duck's arse, watertight. The two centre sections, like this, the bottom and top, I am going to glue, and I'm not going to bother with traditional hand cut mortars and tenon. This is quicker and it's going to get me there, without fucking about. To attach the top, I'm going to use M12 bolts, and I'm going to expand these holes so those bolts can slide backwards and forwards, and I'll use two 40mm washers. The reason for using two 40mm washers is underneath the head of the nut. If I only use one washer, it isn't going to slide against the wood very freely. With two washers, that head of that nut can move that top washer over the washer underneath it very freely. I hope that makes sense to you. I'll show you what I mean though. So like that, there's no resistance against the wood. It's metal against metal. That'll slide easily. I'm not going to make these expansion slots look pretty, because I tell you why, I don't know how to. They're fugly at the best of times, and it's two drill holes that you've got to just make them meet. And then something, I think that's 70mm stock or something like that. It's you can't exactly get a router in there, router bit in down that far. So c'est la vie. If anybody has a better idea of making these expansion slots nice and neat and beautiful, please let me know. As I was doing a trial run, practice put together as it were, I noticed a few problems. I don't know what went wrong there, but I had to fix that. And this odd staining properly blew my wormhole. I don't know where that came from or what it was. It kind of looks like there's been iron or something that's reacting with the oak. Weird. To fix that non-90 degree side, I'm going to use the track saw, because that is a lot easier than running this through the planar AK jointer, simply because of the weight and the length. Easier to get a 90 degree edge from the track saw, much safer to do too. You could end up losing a lot of mass by going to the jointer with something this size and weight. This is going to lose a couple of mil, which is problematic in the end, but nonetheless, that sawn face will be the side I'll put through the thicknesser face down, so then that will give me my parallel faces. From that, I'll flip the board over and run the sawn side through the thicknesser to give me a nice clean face, and there you have it. So these are the connectors that I would use from Festool to join panels together, all 24 of them. They work pretty similarly really. I mean, they use a cross anchor bolt either side of the bolt, and as you can see, that sort of cupped area of that bolt, when you put that grub Allen key screw thingy job in there, it will pull those together using the cross anchors, kind of putting them together, clamping it all together. I've never aged something on this scale before. This was quite monumental. It was a struggle to work out how to sort of make a tent and cover it. But one thing I've got to assure you, make no mistake, this stuff is pretty vile. It's not that I can smell this stuff, but the fumes are feeling like they're burning my eyes. It's not pleasant, so yeah, you want to make it quick and get the out of there, really. I had to try fuming this space so many times. I didn't really realise that ammonia really loses its stink, let's call it. So I'm using old footage. I think I ended up going through 3 containers worth of ammonia in the end to get it as dark as I did. I made a proper schoolboy error here. I didn't properly clean up the glue. I had a go, but I didn't do it well enough, and that's the outcome. So it was basically sand it back and, do it all over again, basically. If you're wondering why I go to this lengths, this is why. If you stain a piece of wood and then hit it with something, you're going to see that dent. That fuming goes pretty deep, so you don't see it. So this is why this video, one of the reasons why this video takes so long. Given there's a few different species of oak in there, it turned out pretty well in the end. I think I like that aging look. It's kind of like a new old look. It's the best way I can explain it. You remember me having to deal with that part of the workbench top that wasn't 90 degrees, so the two pieces didn't marry together properly. Well, in doing so, it's made the whole top slightly lose some width, so I'm having to deal with that and hide that mistake. I've got to say, these clamps are epic. They hold so fast. I wouldn't trust the Festool clamps to hold that. It's a bit of a precarious cut, that's for sure, and it needs to be a plunge cut really, and because that's the TS55, it's only cutting 55mm, so I'm going to need to finish that off by hand and clean it up. The nice thing about fuming wood is it really penetrates deeply. So I got away with this quite well. As you can see, when I put the finish on, it looks like I've just sawn straight through a piece of walnut, and it all matches and blends in quite nicely. I pre-finished all of the parts to this bench, and I put 2 coats of hard wax oil on. I was really surprised how much hard wax oil it took to finish all of this as well. It's all nicely sealed and ready to be put together. Now this gear, I cannot find where I bought it from. I'm pretty sure it's an American item, and they use it to make gaskets, on a car engine out of. It's got some weird, bizarre name like flubber or something. But I used this on my mini worktop bench on the Mox and Vice jaws. Wow, it is so much better than using leather, and I'm not finding it's peeling back like leather does. This sticks much better and also grips a workpiece much better than leather. The adhesive spray I use is an automotive adhesive that can withstand high temperatures. Some of my dash in my car was covered in Alcantara, and I use this spray on it. So even with the sun beating down and all day parked outside the workshop, it didn't bubble up or anything. So this is probably my favourite spray adhesive. And just add a little chamfer just to help that flubber or whatever it's called not peel away from the edge, because I'm sure if you want to pull on it aggressively, it will come away eventually. But carpenter's vice, you can see there, that's got leather. I keep having to stick that back or eventually cover that carpenter's vice with the same gear too. Now I did weigh all of the parts of this bench, and it was well north of 300 kilos. It was very close to 400 kilos. I can't remember off the top of my head now. Now with some storage underneath, which I'm sure I'm going to be asked to do at some point, that's probably going to weigh nearly half a ton when it's when all the storage is full up. I'm well jealous of that bench. Bit tall for me, but man, looks too good to use though, doesn't it?
I can check square.